All right. How's it going, everybody? It's it's afternoon here. Everybody's got some coffee. Everybody's kind of just jaded. Just a little bit of a smile. The eyes are closing. Let's liven up a little bit. Let's clap. Let's clap. Thank you. Thanks. So I was actually going to use this picture here, and I thought, I don't know. Maybe these folks are going to be a little more serious, e-commerce. And so I went with the professional looking, but maybe I'll go with this one just to next time when you're speaking at 3 p.m. and people are just kind of, on their computer. They sat through 3 talks already. But I'm Dmitry, and I'm just going to start with this. How many people, and a lot of people start their talks with how many, and I'm kind of like over it, but I just wanted to ask, people are sitting there, if you're working on a brand, on a product, on something that you want people to buy, how many times have you thought about putting that brand, that product in press? Like New York Times, Entrepreneur Magazine, we have some people, any kind of press, publications, maybe influencers, right? And so you've always wondered, how do I do that, right? There's these people called PR firms that charge a lot of money. I didn't know how to do it. 10 years ago, I just knew how to code, write really great pieces of code and build software, and also just how to be a good engineer. I had no idea how to get published in publications. And so for me, to write for lots of different publications, right? Really humbling experience nowadays. That's all I do these days is I write for lots of publications. My company and companies get featured in publications all the time. Interviews with Forbes. I have these big folks that have millions of followers tweet out my brand, for example, right? I didn't know how to do this stuff, and I didn't have money for a PR firm either. I just had a brand or a product or something I wanted to sell, and I knew that if I got one guy to tweet it out to 1.69 million people, chances are I'll probably get a few sales, maybe a couple hundred sales. Or if I got one guy to interview me on Forbes, I could probably get some sales off of it. And so I thought, well, how can I get those people to share my product? All right? There's lots of people out there that have a big, big audience of people they can share it with. And so I decided building relationships with them. And these are some of the stories, like just the power of building these relationships on your own, without a PR firm, without delegating it to anybody else. Here's one of my students. I run a coaching program that coaches people how to do PR, how to build these relationships with press and influencers. This guy, Arthur, right? He had a company, it was an apparel company, underwear, Spartan underwear. The whole play on this thing was actually this underwear that prevents radiation, because people that fly on planes a lot, it's lined with something inside. I don't know. It was great underwear, though. He sent me a couple, but he wanted press and publicity and exposure for his brand. He was a small 2-man shop in Paris. And so he started building relationships. We'll get into 4 strategies of how to do this stuff. But after he built it, he was at CES here in New York City. He got so much publicity by wearing his underwear. There's a whole story of how he got to CES through building these relationships. But he moved his company to New York City here because of a few articles that he was able to get in Mashable and Business Insider, and get his company featured and to get his sales to a level where he could move the whole company. Versus Brad has got another entirely different story from publicity and building relationships with journalists and press and influencers, and he's now outranking Wikipedia for the current term sales management, and that's his whole company. It revolves around sales management, CRM. So, Martin answered the Quora question that received over 1 million views. His only answer received more than 1 million views. He got over 600 customers off this one answer on Quora. And Of course, Hero, one of my recent students, he just recently joined, he never written an article for a publication in his life before. He writes this article in I think it was this year that he published this. It was up on the homepage of Fast Company. He submitted it as a guest writer. He's never written another article before. He submits it to a guest writer. It was on the homepage of Fast Company for 18 hours. He received the most publicity he's ever gotten in his entire life off this one article. And so the whole point is that you can do this. Anybody can do this that doesn't have any experience in building relationships with press, with media, with influencers. It's possible, right? I never had formal educational background in this. I've done it. My students have done it. And, in this prezo, I just want to give you 4 ways to do this right now, and I'll actually challenge you at the end to do it today. Maybe tomorrow, but maybe today. Before we get to the 4 ways of how to do this stuff, I want to tell you just quickly who is an influencer. An influencer is anybody who has your customers, right? It could be another brand, another company that has your customers, or it could be a blogger or a journalist or a reporter. That's an influencer in my space. So it could be a founder of a company, it could be a journalist, it could be a blogger, it could be even an investor. And some examples in my space, for example, Matt, he's the founder of WordPress. Certainly is an investor, he's got influence. He's got, pretty decent influence. He can influence a lot of different sites. So to me, he's an influencer who can connect me to people who have my customers, right? Tim Ferriss for our work week, Tools of Titans, the recent book he came out with. Again, he's an influencer in a different way. You've got Gary Vaynerchuk, you've got Christina from Mashable, she's a reporter. These people can help me different ways to reach my goals of selling more product, right? Jessica Livingston, you wouldn't really think of her as an influencer that you would connect with, but yet again, she is connected, as a Y Combinator partner, she's connected to lots of different companies that could buy your product down the line. Influential. Andrea, she controls the guest posts at Entrepreneur. So you might not necessarily think of her as a person you would talk to, but then again, if you wanted a guest column on Entrepreneur, she would be the one to talk to. So there's different types of people, and everybody has different type of personalized kind of conversation starter, right? Ashton Kutcher, in your case, you're like, why is Ashton Kutcher up there? Well, he actually is okay, I guess I got a... I guess my mic just turned on or something. But Ashton Kutcher, he invests in a lot of startups, in a lot of companies. He's very well connected. So in your space, you might connect to him and connect to your customers through him by getting those partnerships lined up. So again, anybody who has an audience of yours, right? You think of partnerships, think of somebody who has their blog that is read by customers, by potential customers, somebody who's invested in stuff that is similar to what you guys do. That's an influencer. And each one of those people, whether it's an investor or a partner or a blogger, needs a personalized conversation starter because you guys want to start a conversation with a real human. What does that look like? Here's Daryl. Daryl writes for TechCrunch, the mecca for lots of different companies and startups and any venture out there. Now, I'm reaching out to him, and I'm talking about Hue Phillips light bulbs, which I know absolutely nothing about, and I basically am just striking up a conversation, just as if I was standing face-to-face with him at a conference just like this, strike up a conversation. I happen to know that he's covered the API and he's covered this topic, so I did a little more digging on this topic. Just out of goodness of my heart, because I want to start a conversation with Daryl with this email. And I say, hey, I saw these guys who actually created a video testing out their new API. I'm not promoting these guys. I don't know. I have no relationship with both of these parties. He publishes an article. That article includes that video. Our conversation starts, and we start building that relationship. So this was the email that I sent to Ashton Kutcher. This email took me about a year to put together. All right? I took all the people he's mentioned in his tweets, and interviewed them on my speaker series. And it took me over a year to get all these people on board. And then I reach out to him and I say, first and foremost, I'm really humbled to be writing an email to you. I've had all these people on board. I'd love for you to participate as well. And he responds, great, talk to my assistant. The conversation starts. And so these types of direct responses, starting up a conversation, I always say, if you're standing right in line at a conference with this reporter, with this journalist, with whoever you want to start a conversation with, would you say what you're emailing them out loud? And if you will, then go ahead and email. But if you wouldn't say whatever you're emailing to them out loud, up front, when you're just starting a conversation, then don't do it. Don't send that email. So I always read mine out loud. Mernal, I used to work with him at a company that got acquired called Crossloop, and we would start conversations like this. Now, Walt Mossberg is sort of, the version 1.1 of a tech reporter. He's been reporting on tech forever, and to start a conversation, relationship with him, really, really, really a big deal. So we started a conversation over something that he tweets, as something near and dear to him, and months down the line, 6 months down the line, 4 months down the line, we got that article. But it takes a little while to build that relationship, right? So would you say this to them or not? That's one thing I want you guys to remember. If you remember anything from whatever I'm saying right now, is read your email out loud. Whatever you're doing, cold pitching, you're trying to get a journalist to write about your brand, you're trying to strike up a partnership with somebody, you do any kind of cold email, read it out loud. Would you say this very same thing to that person if you're standing with them face to face? And if you will, then go ahead and send it. So here are 4 strategies. I'm just going to go over these to make sure that you build those relationships with press and influencers and anybody who has your customers, right? The very first one, and this is the lowest hanging fruit, and I think anybody should be doing this right now. Become a source for an article. And what do I mean by that? I mean that every day, thousands of journalists are submitting requests to an expert to be featured in their article. They need somebody in their article to basically be a quote. That's all they want. And so this is a typical one right here. This is for Entrepreneur magazine, for an upcoming piece. I'd love to chat with you. A small retailer entrepreneur with very clever, memorably designed box or bag in which you ship items. Thousands of these come out, and you just need to respond to these. That's all you do. And you become a source for an article. Lowest hanging fruit. They are asking you, basically. You already know what they need. And so if you fit the bill, we do at Just Reach Out, we kind of gather all of these, but you can go to helpareporter.com, or Radio Guest List is another one for podcast interviews. There's lots of different ones out there. You can do this almost right away, and it's free, and you can start getting those relationships rolling, at least a little bit. Tip your toes in the water a little bit with this strategy here. Second one, Quora and Reddit. That's a phenomenal way for you to quickly find relevant Quora and Reddit threads and comment on them, right? So in this case, you got different types of topics. So we let you search for them in our tool, but you can go to Quora itself, you can go on Reddit, and you can find the best topics that are relevant to you, that people are asking questions about, and essentially you answer them. Now, one thing that happens with Quora is that a lot of the answers here have a potential to be republished on Fortune, on Newsweek, on Huffington Post, and Forbes as well. And so, because there's a whole nomination process here, but the first thing that you would do, I would say, is just make sure you answer one of these questions. And then once you've answered it, then you can nominate it to be republished on Newsweek, on Fortune, on Forbes, on Huffington Post, and get that article. If you look up Quora Forbes or Quora Huffington Post, you will see they handpick one out of hundreds, maybe thousands of answers, and they publish it pretty much weekly, or I think at least twice a week you'll see that answer published. So you have a possibility of not only getting some publicity by answering this question. Of course, you want to pick a question that is ranking high on Google, so it's pulling great traffic already, right? Maybe it's 5, maybe it's number 3 result on Google search for that term, and so you're answering it. So anybody who's hitting that answer, or every time somebody is doing a search, reading through the answers, you want to be the best answer on it, and so you're pulling some traffic that way. But regardless of that, you can also nominate it to be published as an article on Fortune, on Newsweek, on some of these other publications, and get yourself some exposure. So Quora and Reddit is not a great one. I actually use Quora and Reddit to strike conversations up with journalists. So remember that example from Dell where I said, hey, Philips light bulbs. What I do is I answer a question on Quora, and I reach out to a journalist, and I say, hey, listen, I don't think I did it justice. Can you please answer it and set me straight, kind of thing. And that's a great way to start a conversation with a journalist or a blogger, because you're essentially referencing them already in your answer, and you're saying, hey, could you please, any loose ends here, like anything else you can offer in terms of my answer on it. And I might even reference their article. So I might take one of their articles, reference it in my answer on Quora in here, and then I would say, all right, well, we're trying to reach out and say, hey, I referenced your article. What do you think about my answer? That kind of thing. It's a great way to start that conversation with that blogger, journalist, who eventually will cover you. It's just you need to start that conversation, and this is an easy way to do it. The third way, and this is the third out of the 4, so we had, so far we've done the first one, become a source for the article, the second one, Quora and Reddit. The third one here is data or insights. So this is a great one. I used to create polls, and this is the company I used to work for, Polar. We started it in 2012. It was acquired by Google in 2014. And we built the entire company from 0 to 40 million page views based on these emails right here. We would create polls just like this. I made a poll for you on iOS design. iOS 6 versus iOS 7. I have some data for you. Would you like to use it in your article? And that was just every day. We would pull tons of these on breaking news issues. And so we would constantly always be asking people to, hey, would you want to use our data? And articles just like this would come out every single day about whatever that topic may be that we're pitching them. And it was very actionable for them to use. Data and insights is the best way to kind of get, and there's tons of tools out there where you can actually use the data that you gather, right? If you don't have an audience, you can get an audience and gather the data. So Polar was acquired by Google, and after that, we kind of went our own separate ways. The point of the story, though, is anything like this, providing data or insights. For example, in this pitch here, we're taking some social trends, some data here, and we're just offering it to journalists to use in their articles and their publications. And so by doing this, articles like this come out, and this is a great way to start conversations, start that relationship with your journalist, with that publication, whatever that influencer may be. And you might not get covered in that first initial poll that you create. You might get a byline saying a poll by John, right? But as you start building this relationship, as you start providing valuable insights, valuable data to these publications, you start building that relationship, and the goal here is just to start that conversation, right? And the fourth, the final one, right, is interviewing somebody. And I used to do this back in the day. I still do this all the time. It's a great way to start a conversation. You want a conversation with a journalist or an influencer or anybody out there who, you want to cover you, start asking them a question, start promoting them, start giving them value, and then once you've given them enough value, then they will ask you how can they return the favor, right? So I used to do this all the time to people that are not even journalists, right? I wanted to do relationships with influencers or investors. Investors have a lot of customers and people that I might convert as customers, my potential customers. There are other investments, and so I would strike up these conversations, and I would get these, Paul Brookite, he's the creator of Gmail, Robert Scoble, this was back in 2008, 2009. These people were, really well-known folks in the Valley, and so I would build these relationships by just interviewing them, right? And when you interview them, you grab a quote from them, you put it in a blog post, say on your own blog, say on somebody else's blog, you start that conversation, you start that relationship. that you can leverage down the line, right? You can take these quotes, you can mention them on Quora and so forth to keep going, to keep building that relationship. So I want to quickly review just so that you guys remember something from this. If you remember anything, would you say this out loud? So I want you guys just to challenge yourself next time you send an email out to anybody. Would you say it out loud? Just read it out loud to yourself. And if you would not say that very thing out loud to that person you're emailing, don't write that email. Rewrite it. So that's the first thing in terms of pitching and sending out emails. And now the 4 things that we just went over, right? The first thing is help a reporter or any kind of radio guest list becoming a source for an article. That's the lowest hanging fruit for you guys that are just starting out, right? These people are hungry. They're waiting for an expert in your field. We gather these opportunities on Just Reach Out. You can do it yourself by subscribing to lots of different newsletters, such as helpareporterout.com, or there's also radio guest list. There's also Source Bottle. There's lots of these. Become a source for an article. Answer a Quora Reddit question. Remember, you can republish these things on other publications. There's a capability to do that. Not all of them, majority of them won't be picked, but there's a way you can actually get a lot of traffic from Quora. If you pick up the right Quora question that's ranking really high on Google and you answer it at the right time, you can be just like that example I showed you where Martin scored 1 million views on his answer. 1 million views. This is a person that's never done PR. He's a one-man show, right? So Quora and Reddit, extremely powerful in terms of dipping your feet in the water, PR space, and striking up conversations with journalists and influencers in the space. Providing data and insights. That was number 3 that we talked about. So if you have any data, any kind of polls, and even if you don't have any polls, it takes you literally maybe 10 minutes to get data on something, right? There's a company called OnePulse, one of our customers actually. You can literally get data in 10 minutes, up to like 200 or 300 results on any poll that you create. And then you can take that poll and pitch it to journalists and influencers to start the conversation. Very powerful. And then the last thing is interviewing somebody. If you want to quickly start a conversation with someone, you don't have any means to do so, asking them for their opinion and promoting them is a great way to start a conversation with anybody, whether they are a journalist or whether they're just a blogger or an influencer, any type of folks out there. So here are the 4 ones that we went over. Once more, I want you guys to kind of look at these now and see which one would you pick this week or maybe next week to work on. Because I really challenge you to try and do one of these 4 things. I'm a very actionable guy. I love to kind of action after I listen to something. I don't like to just waste time and just kind of listen to a bunch of talks, go home, like forget about stuff, then think about it, then email somebody about it. I just want to kind of do things as I learn them. So these 4 things, you're looking at them now. You can do one of these, and I'm sure you will get some results with these things because over 4,000 people use my software now. They've all gotten results. We have 250 people who signed up for my coaching program in the year. All of them are getting results. And this is the very basis of just anybody who doesn't know how to do any of it, just to start somewhere, right? So try one of these 4 things. And I challenge you to give one of these a try. Seriously do. I want you to set aside, it won't take more than 15. Set aside 15 minutes and then email me. This is my email. I want you to email me and actually tell me how it went. Like, Dmitry, completely sucked. I didn't know where to start. Or I tried it, didn't work out. Or, something worked. Or leave feedback. Email me on one of these 4 things as you're trying them out. Even if you give it a thought and you can't create the first email or whatever, I want to hear how it went. And all right, so I'm going to take some questions, and then hopefully they're going to let me tell me, if we're over time or. Yes, go ahead.
What are some tactics that you use to identify people that you think want to target as influencers, as agents?
Yeah. So essentially, in the beginning, I was saying, anybody who has your customers and has the attention span of your customers. So that's where I start. Like in my space, a lot of people, that have companies that already have customers that I want, is the easiest way for me to kind of start thinking about it. But then outside of it, which publications and blogs and people have your customers? So, I'm in the, say you're doing a food startup, right? So a lot of times I like to go to Alltop, which is a directory for blogs, and type in a topic of interest. So I might type in food, and it'll give me all the top blogs in food industry, right? And I might start looking through there and say, all right, well, which ones of these blogs don't have that many followers that I might want to practice on? Because I always want to start with somebody who has, I don't know, maybe say 1,000 visits a day, or I don't know, 500 a day. Somebody who's not like millions a day, right? There are hundreds of thousands. And so what I'm looking for is some of those smaller blogs on, say, alltop.com that are food blogs that might have, if I have a food startup, that might have my customers. On the other hand, I might go to a tool called BuzzSumo, which is a great tool. They were just acquired by Brandwatch. They're really good friends of mine, Henley and Steve. And so on BuzzSumo, you can kind of filter out influencers, right? And so you can type in a keyword such as, food or alcohol or whatever, and you can see who is food startup, for example. You can see who is, followers 50,000 and more, this kind of rank, is the influencer that I should be talking to. So that's another signal. So you might go after food blogs on Alltop. You might go after influencers on BuzzSumo. You might make a list of companies, in your space that might have your customers. But essentially, you're trying to think, where are my customers concentrating on the web? Which little corner, which little forum, which little groups? Facebook groups is a little bit of undiscovered, like still kind of quiet area, but so much stuff is happening in Facebook groups now. So becoming more and more active in those communities might really help. Slack channels as well. You're just essentially making a list of all the different corners of the web where your customers are hanging out and seeing how you can build a relationship to it. So, all right.
We still have time for a question or two?
A question or two? All right, go ahead.
For B2B, what do you think of LinkedIn? Any tips on blogging or posting on LinkedIn?
Yeah. LinkedIn is pretty powerful. One thing that I will say is your SEO, and I was just earlier talking about with the Jumping Squirrel guys, which are awesome at PR, by the way. You take a LinkedIn name, and what you do is you can put a description of your service in there. And so what happens is most people in the name itself, they'll just list the name of the company and that's it. What you can do is you can put food startup in parentheses or something like that. And so what happens is now anybody who's typing in food startup into LinkedIn, now your profile will show up above everybody else's if you type that into your name. But in terms of PR and things like that, Dennis, the person that I mentioned in the presentation, he's a big influencer. He's comes like LinkedIn Powers is his whole handle on there. Anybody on LinkedIn, you still use BuzzSumo to identify those influencers on LinkedIn who you want to talk to. Essentially, I would look at groups on LinkedIn and individual influencers, just like Dennis. Those two types of folks that might, have the capability of pushing out your content in there. Sponsorships of groups or contributing content, discussions in groups, that would be probably the best. All right, go ahead.
Do you have any recommended Slack communities that we should join?
Yeah, Slack. Online Geniuses rocks. Online Geniuses rocks. I've been to a few. There's honestly, there's just like so many like craziness with a lot of these communities where you have so many discussions going on all at once that I sometimes get. There's another one called Entrepreneurs Headquarters that I've been a part of. There's a lot. I usually just go to the directory listings and stuff, but yeah.